Uh,
Thank you for asking me to come on. I don't know how coherent I'll be at this time, but I'll do my best. So,
Actually, but yeah, like because I've seen like a lot of your sort of statuses. I think you also even did some a few videos in regards to what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of, I guess, in general, like the red pill culture and the Muslim community, our reactions to that. The Akh-Right, I think you mentioned in one of your videos as well, and
yeah,
even like the whole situation with Andrew Tate and what happened there, and in terms of, I guess, the reaction to the Muslim community. So I think there's a lot to unpack. Should be really interesting.
sure.
Um, but in terms of like, what's your sort of perception idea of the sort of red pill slash manosphere culture at the moment in general that you witness in I guess the Western
Um,
society in general?
it's an extreme reaction to feminism. It's it's an adoption of, yet again by Muslims, an adoption of Western solutions for Western problems. So rather than borrow from our tradition, utilizing our tradition to deal with this issue, Muslims simply borrow yet another Western ideology. So I would say, to be as concise as possible, red pill ideas come from the same place as feminism. That's kufr.
Mm.
So, so that's going to make a lot of people angry, but you know,
But I guess because you touched on the sort of anti-feminist reaction, I
yeah,
think
that's what it is.
yeah, and in general, it's been a sort of visceral reaction at times, and you see, I think you've termed it as well, and it's been used now in Muslim circles called the Akh-Right. So how do you sort of define that in the
The
Muslim
Akh-Right,
context?
um, it's just a clever turn of phrase, and like so we talk about the alt-right, which is an attempt to rebrand far right ideology in trying to adopt this idea of traditional Western idealism. Like traditional liberalism, traditional this, traditional that, traditional gender roles, etc. And so the Akh-Right is simply borrowing from them. So I just named them the Akh-Right instead of the alt-right. That's really what it is. I mean, we can discuss the differences between Muslim traditionalism or Islamic traditionalism when it comes to gender versus Western. But in general, Western traditionalism really does consider women to be below or second class. It sees women as only playing a submissive role and not having any value outside of serving men. Whereas in the Islamic tradition, although roles are allocated to both genders, women are not valued in that way or simply in that way. Women can be valued in other ways as well. It's more holistic, and at the same time, we don't consider women less valuable than men. Whereas in the Western world, they do, or they did. That's why feminism came into existence. So,
Yeah, and in terms of that, would you say with the reaction or the idea of gender roles in Islam? I think you did do a paper. I can't actually recall this or something to that effect.
I didn't do a paper.
Okay,
It's okay.
but in terms of uh, because living in Western societies, do you think that with the Muslim community and how we view gender roles, is it mostly how do we kind of extract it from the Islamic tradition and extract those ideals and values in our current context? So I think that's the difficulty that we have, where it's like, okay, how do we make sense of Western society, and then in that within that picture, it's like, how do we bring Islam to the table and extract from it?
Yeah.
Because
Well, right
yeah.
now, it seems to me like, aside from borrowing from Western traditionalism to solve this issue, it also seems like a lot of these red pill sort of Akh-Right Muslims are utilizing cultural sentiments or cultural traditions and trying to also conform those to what they consider to, basically trying to, what is the word I'm looking for? Conflate those with the Islamic tradition. So, for example, this idea that women don't need to be educated. um, because men are the ones who work, and at the same time, women, if they get educated, they're going to experience fitna, and we can't do that because we have to protect our women. And it's like, okay, but at the same time, we don't apply these same standards to men. And then there's usually a lot of like post hoc rationalizations for that, like, well, it's a necessity for men because they have to work, when that's not really the case. For example, if you want to, have to go to university, if you want to work, you can do something else. Things like that. So there's a lot of like very superficial reasoning that's utilized to kind of put women in a place of uh, of sort of lacking education and opportunity. um, and then what they do is that they'll use the most extreme examples of Western problems with women doing these things, and then say, "Well, this is going to happen to every single woman in our community," and it's like, no. Like, um, so there's a lot of like a lot of sensationalism that occurs in order to justify this stuff.
Yeah, and it becomes difficult because what we view, so essentially, those kind of Akh-Right mentality, they love to extract the little, I don't know, from within Islam to justify this sort of preconceived ideas about how they view the world should function when it comes to in the context of gender roles. So I think that sort of idea needs also unpacking, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to our reality, because our reality now living in the West is, especially if from a diaspora, like me personally, I'm from like a Bangladeshi background, so family coming here, it's not going to be easy, living in the West in general, kind of making a
Yeah.
way up within society. And a lot of families have a much more rough in the sense that their the families are probably like by themselves within the West, so then they have to sort of make their way, and living costs are difficult,
Hmm.
and so it's like within that kind of situation, it's like women are forced to sort of work and get educated because it's like the only way to kind of support it. And so
That's true.
rather
Yeah.
than, I guess, the Akh-Right kind of portray it as, look, I don't know, women are getting corrupted, look at them going to work. It's like it's almost devoid of the reality that we live in and unpacking the reality that we are in. It's like women are, not to say I wouldn't, it's not like I'm suggesting that they shouldn't be working. Well, of course, like in the sense of within women getting educated, that's important in general, regardless of what era we're in. But I guess in terms of, I'm just talking about the society that we're in, or men and women are sort of pushed to work in general because of dual incomes to support the family and living costs going up. So it's about unpacking the sort of realities and bring that to the table. But it becomes a very one-sided kind of perception to things. And comes to, oh, I don't know, women are being corrupted by feminist ideals because they force them to go to work and all that. So I guess the
Yeah. There's a lot
conversation
of
gets really here.
loaded and false assumptions in a lot of the arguments that they utilize. And I think, yeah, we can unpack that. That's perfectly fine. I also want to showcase what the Islamic tradition is far more balanced. It does adapt to certain circumstances, like you were suggesting or implying that there are different circumstances when you're coming to the West, and a lot of people do have to work two jobs, or should I say, a lot of parents have to work at the same time in order to support the family because it's not exactly easy to work on one income unless you're making over $100,000 a year, which most Americans do not make. That said, or even many people in the West for that matter, but that said, there's also education. You'll notice too that the Alt-Right, a lot of these red pill guys, they don't see education the same way as Islam sees education. They see education in a very materialistic, superficial fashion. They see it as only as a means to get money, which is why
Mm,
they say women don't have to have an education because women aren't the ones who work. But it's not what an education is in Islam. An education is not just to get money.
mm,
Like if a woman wants to study, she should be allowed to study just for the sake of it, not because she's going to get a job.
exactly. Yeah.
So
To be fair though as well, I guess with the capitalistic society that we're in, like in my sort of specific context in Sydney, where right now even to do like degrees in not just like in STEM, but in social sciences, where they're hiking up the university fees for social sciences specifically because they want people to, work in STEM so that they can get like jobs that require them, to
Mm-hmm.
produce and contribute to the economy, as they say. So it becomes even more difficult in the sense of, pursuing knowledge for the sake of it, because it's almost like society is gearing you to become a certain worker in order to contribute to the economy and to, keep the economy function, the capitalist kind of society running. So it becomes even more difficult in that sense.
I see that argument, but at the same time, I think that we're putting too much of the burden on the sisters. We're saying that it's so you have to sacrifice everything, and it's like, well, that's not. I mean, we need to be balanced. I think in terms of how we deal with the situation, especially the capitalistic society and how we approach it. It's one thing to bring up the problems with capitalism that I would agree with, but it's another thing to always put the burden on women for all the fitna and all the issues and all this. It's like for example, I hear this all the time. It's like, well, we can't let women go to the university because then they free mix, and then they will all commit zina, and then they'll become feminist, and then they'll all do this and that. And it's like, well, what about all the brothers who are going to the free mixing universities and doing well, it's a necessity. So wait, so they can sacrifice their dean because they have to get a job. So why do they go to university? Why can't they just be garbage collectors? Why can't they just be farmers? Why can't they just of course, but if you bring that up, it's like, no, 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 because our parents need us to be doctors and engineers. No offense to the
Yeah,
basic culture,
exactly.
but it's like, oh, so that's okay. So for your cultural conventions, you can go to university and sacrifice your dean to get a career, but the
Exactly.
sisters have to stay home. It's like, okay, like it's like, no,
And
because the
even,
argument has to
yeah,
be applied equally to both, right? I mean, if you really care about fitna, if you care about liberalization being secularized, then why is it the brothers are somehow considered quote unquote stronger? You
mm,
know, it's not
I think
fair.
I think the counter argument to that will be like, I don't know, within Islam, I don't know, women, it's kind of, I don't know, pictured as women have to stay, in the households and men have to provide. So then that's kind of the justification that's used to say like, no, because, men, it's almost like their right or their role to do that. So that's why they have to do it in this
But
society.
it's a ruse, because the thing is, let's agree with that fiqh position, right? Fine. Again, though, the argument is not that women necessarily have to stay home. That's what's used after the fact. It's that if women go to the university, they experience fitna, they experience this and that, and they'll lose their dean, right? But then the same thing is not applied to the men. And it's like, okay, well, there are other ways to make income. You don't have to go to
Mm,
university. So if
yeah.
you really want to stick to this position of women stay at home, men go work, men don't have to go to university to work.
Mm.
They don't.
And
So
yeah. Yeah, and then I guess to add to your point as well, the fact I don't know how I know like in America in terms of loans to go to college, like in Australia they call it HEX, and so it's
mhm,
like a loan that's not interest based, but it's based on inflation. So I don't know if you pay like $8,000 worth of uni fees in 1 year, they won't add interest, but over time you'll have to pay it back in inflation, which is like, I
a
guess
lot.
local scholars have sort of said like, okay, that's kind of it's permissible because of necessity, etc. So then, to kind of bring it back to your point, I heard in America it's like, the uni fees are crazy and all that, and so technically speaking, it is interest and riba, and we know the ramifications of taking on riba and interest within
Yeah.
in general within Islam. So it's like even the ramifications that you're talking about, it's like great. It's like, well, what's the point of actually going to university? The technical kind of safer option if you want to be really Islamic is like, as you mentioned, like being a farmer, etc. So even that kind of logic doesn't add up in that sense as well, because you're taking out
It
like
does.
loans and all that.
There's always exceptions. The issue here is that even if we look at the fiqh and we think things are permissible because of necessity, right? The other problem is that when we talk about necessity, when we talk about these fiqh arguments, we're only applying it to men. Again, why do the sisters still have to have this very black and white fiqh positions applied to them, but the men get away with everything? This show, I'm just saying, like, I'm not being a feminist. I'm saying this is not fair. You can't, you have to apply it to both equally. You can't say that, you know, the fiqh doesn't change for women for 1400 years, but for the men, it's always changing for some reason. It's like it doesn't work that way. I'm sorry. Um, and I don't know if you want to get into this. I don't know if you want to talk about personalities, and I understand if you don't. But I think the other irony about all these arguments is that it's coming from positions from individuals who are either extremely hypocritical in the way that they live, or don't have to necessarily uh, the things that they're talking about, they don't experience themselves.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example, and I won't mention him by name. But
Mention names, they'll be even better. But
okay, well, if you want,
don't hold
but the
back.
thing, we won't, since we're not recording it, I think, right? So, um, but like, there's a particular Akh-Right figurehead in the Ummah, right? Who constantly preaches about how women shouldn't be getting educated, they should stay at home, they should only value being mothers and wives, and how there's so much fit. Basically, the forerunner of all these arguments, right? And yet, his wife is educated in Harvard University, which is why she's capable of actually teaching her kids at home. He doesn't have any concern about income because his family takes care of him. He lives in like a mansion in the middle of the city. He doesn't have, you know, and then at the same time, he's always talking about how other Muslims lack testosterone because they don't speak the truth like he does.
Oh
And
wow.
yet he has an assortment of physical disabilities that correlate strongly with lacking testosterone. So,
Subhanallah.
like obesity, vitamin D deficiency, and other such things. So it's like a lot of these figureheads, not just one person, but a lot of the people on the spectrum of Akh-Rightness. If you actually look at the way they live their lives and the way that they are as people, right? Not only do they not fulfill the ideal image of the Western alpha, but neither do they fill the role of the Islamic alpha. And yet they're the ones preaching about it constantly. Like 90% of these guys couldn't fight in jihad if they wanted to.
Yeah, subhanallah.
So I'm sorry, I know that sounds like really kind of petty, but at the same time, I do think it is relevant to some extent, because if we're talking about the relevancy of their arguments, the validity of their arguments, and yet the individuals themselves behind the podium are completely incapable of fulfilling these things, why are we taking from them seriously? So
Yeah. There's a lot to even unpack in that, because it's really interesting you brought that up in terms of like you mentioned at the beginning, like interesting with like personalities. I do think there's a sort of narcissism behind it, in the sense of the person who only tries to utilize Islam conveniently to what they want, and it
mm,
becomes like skewed in that manner, and they extract from, like, for example, a kind of misogynistic interpretation of Islam, right? Like we sort of unpacked, and so they only utilize Islam through that particular lens. It's almost like benefiting themselves, if anything. And so it's like when you utilize Islam in that manner, it becomes really dangerous. Like, I guess within, when it comes to studying Islam in the traditional sense, like many years ago, my teachers were telling me how like they'll be studying akhlaq for like many years, even before like they'll actually touch like Islamic texts and learn it.
mm.
So it's like that sort of importance in our tradition is like is significant, and unfortunately, it's with these kind of figures that are within the community, they only extract what they seem or deem to be convenient, but
Oh,
really kind of devoid of the realities that you just mentioned.
you're exactly correct. They don't take Islam holistically. In fact, especially when they talk about all these issues, they rarely mention the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They rarely mention the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Awesome.
If you notice their propaganda, they're more likely to share Andrew Tate than they are a statement from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi
Awesome.
wasallam when it comes to women. Like like if you look at the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he never behaved like an alpha male.
Mm.
Like he never behaved like these Western alpha males. Like astaghfirullah, like they would consider him to be a compassionate imam. Like
Oh
in
wow.
many
Yes. Wallah.
in regards to how he treated women and treated other people. Like he was extremely calm and merciful in many respects. They always avoid it, but they will latch themselves onto very, 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 very specific fiqh points found in Hanafi text. you know, no
Mm.
offense to the Hanafis, but what I'm saying is like trying to extrapolate as much as possible from those things. And they don't look at our tradition holistically, nor our history holistically. They only look at very, very specific things. They're very selective, and they, in the same way as you mentioned, that sort of selective uh, research or whatever you want to call it, they also manipulate the text in order to give the impression that the power and responsibility that men have is more of a privilege than it is a burden. When in reality, the maintenance and the protection over women is actually a burden for us. It's actually something that it's a major responsibility that we have to take upon ourselves. It's not something that we are privileged with. Uh, and yet, many of these young Akh-Right bros online act as though they're privileged with it because of their superiority as men, as males. Not in the sense of physicality, which is what the Quran points to, but as being, well, the reason why men are over you is because they have strength or whatever. It's because they honestly believe that they're spiritually, intellectually superior to women. Um, so this idea that they're not being misogynistic is actually quite it's false.
Yeah, and I've seen that sort of behavior in the sense of like depicting women as just like purely like emotional and kind of justifying Islamic rulings to that effect, and kind of having those almost devoid of actual like psychology in terms of understanding different archetypes of male and women. It's not like all male, like even when it comes to describing the male sort of picture of what they have called, for example, the alpha male. Um, it only speaks to like one type of kind of archetype of what it means to be like a man, in the sense of there'll be soft spoken male that is more in tune with his feeling and emotionally intelligent, but that doesn't mean he's less of a man. Like he's still a man in of itself.
Yeah,
It's like almost kind of erasing what it means to be like a human being, which is a bit unfortunate because our tradition is never like that. And in that sense, the Rasul like didn't
so
kind of see men around him in that manner. He saw like strengths in all people and kind of brought it together, as even witnessed within like the context of jihad and utilizing people to their benefit, like Hassan bin Thabit, who was like famous poet. It wasn't like a warrior. So it's like it's not like kind
mm,
of doesn't, just because he's not like some
Khalid
brute
bin Walid or
philosopher,
something.
yeah, doesn't mean he's like a less of a man. He's just
Yeah,
like a strength, and he has
they
qualities
have a
in a
very
different area.
superficial understanding of what it means to be a man. Like I said, they borrow primarily from the Western tradition in terms of manhood, and the Western tradition of manhood um, sees men as being domineering, very boisterous, very outspoken, and a lot of this stuff is really, I think, more an issue of insecurity and a feeling of inferiority, and these sort of personality traits are adopted to posture to cover for those things, because like I said, if you look at, and I'm saying this is relevant, when you look at the figures who are promoting these ideas, they don't fulfill that role, they don't fulfill that idea of an alpha male at all. They're saying, well, they're alpha, but it's like, in actuality, if you look at the definition of what they consider to be manliness, they're actually betas. By all accounts, right? Like, most of the people they call compassionate or liberals or whatever could beat them up like in a second. you know, it's like they don't seem to realize that. Um, so I agree with the sentiment that you're saying there, and I do think that even though the men and women do have very differing psychologies to a degree, I think the problem here is that, as you kind of implied, is that they're not taking the Islamic tradition into account when it comes to defining masculinity and femininity from our view, from our tradition. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up too is that if we're going to talk about popular media, you can see the deviance in their positions by the fact that they bring up somebody like Andrew Tate, but they won't bring up somebody who actually exemplifies the Islamic tradition, in terms of their in terms of manliness. So, for example, I think in one podcast stream or one stream, I brought up the example of Ip Man. You ever seen the movie Ip Man?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well, you've seen like those martial art movies where like the hero is like really stoic, very calm and collected, doesn't fight unless he has to.
Yes.
Okay, that's more of a tradition. That's more in line with Islamic manliness,
Yes.
in terms of honor and integrity, and being balanced, and things like that. Then than somebody like Andrew Tate screaming into a camera talking about how many women he slept with. Right. But because they've been so infected with this ideology, this kufr ideology, they can't see that.
Yeah. Since we're on Andrew Tate, I might as well like kind of ask you the question in terms of what was your thoughts of the viral video. I don't know if like
Oh God.
actually I'll probably like inserted something into the podcast or something, like his actual clip that went viral, because like when I saw that clip, I saw it on Twitter first, and then I started realizing it's like literally everywhere. It's like Facebook, on YouTube. There was like even big like Islamic YouTube pages that kind of have
Yeah,
the
it's
kind of
horrible.
reminders about Islam and stuff like that. They've even posted that on those like big channels. I'm like, what the heck's going on? But yeah, so what's your sort of take on the video in of
I
itself?
also have the video that came after that where he expresses what he really meant by what he thinks Muslims should behave like. If you want to play that as well. But when I first saw it, I was like, I heard what he said, and I kind of like, okay. At first, I nodded my head, and then I thought about it. I was like, this guy sounds really. There's something off about this dude because I didn't know anything about him, honestly. Maybe that's because
Yeah,
I'm old and I don't, I
I
don't
think
read
most
about
people
this stuff.
didn't really know who he was, to be honest.
Yeah. So I'm like this Andrew Tate guy, and he's like, and so I decided to go to this podcast that or this little interview he had, and then I started hearing other things, and I found out who he was. And the more I investigated, I was like, okay, there's something wrong with his perception here because this guy should not be advocating for Islam when he believes all this other stuff. Like he believes he has a right to sleep around with women. He believes he has a right to like, control and dominate women. Like all these ideas he had in his head. It felt strange to me that he would be advocating for Islam because Islam speaks out against everything that he stands for. And I'm like, so then the more I looked in, I was like, okay, yeah, this guy has a very perverse understanding of what it means to be Muslim. And I think one of the biggest red flags that caught my attention first, that kind of made me research, was when he mentioned how he admires Muslims because we're not tolerant of intolerance. And but the example he brought up was very disturbing to me because he was like, if I walked into London right now wearing a shirt that said, Jesus is gay, stuff or something, right?
Yeah.
Nobody would do anything. But if I did the same thing with Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
So,
I would be dead before I reached the end of the street. Now, for a lot of Muslims living in, say, Bangladesh and other places, that may be okay because the laws maybe are more. I don't think in Bangladesh actually that's good, but in other places, maybe more permissible to that, to sort of defending the Prophet ﷺ in terms of physicality, in terms of physical reaction. But when you're living in a non-Muslim state under the fiqh, you're not allowed to just go around murdering, just killing people,
mm,
because you don't like what they
yeah,
have to say. Because it's not permissible for us to do that. We're not living in a Sharia state, right? So this idea that Muslims were okay with him uh, saying that if he walked in London doing this and Muslims would kill him, it's like I was like,
yeah,
okay, that was a red flag for me because it's like, whoa, you're basically
yeah,
justifying all the stabbings and the murders that occurred in Western countries over the last few years.
mm,
Because I mean, just recently, what happened in France with the teacher.
yeah,
Also, it's like, so basically, that's what he was promoting. That's what he was saying, that it was good the Muslims did these things, and I was like, well, if you're going to share this guy's video, you're basically promoting that
yeah,
too.
yeah.
You're
It's
basically
more,
saying all that stuff that happened was legit. Like, so that was a big red flag for me.
yeah. I think it kind of almost echoed the point that like Muslims are vigilantes
Yeah,
in the
like, are
sense
we
of
getting
like,
mad about everything? We just go kill somebody, like what happened to
yeah,
Hatun recently, and I hate her, by the way.
yeah. I
She's an
think
idiot,
everyone does. Yeah,
but it's like, but when if you're gonna sit there and promote Andrew Tate saying that Muslims go around killing people for insulting the Prophet is something he appreciates, and then at the same time you're gonna say, well, we don't agree with what happened to Hatun. I'm sorry, there's a contradiction there.
mm,
People can see that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's That's a good point actually. Yeah, like obviously, like as Muslims, like would be like super angry and annoyed, and if someone spoke ill of our own Prophet. So
So,
so that's not even the question. It's about like kind of, yeah, as you mentioned, like living in the West, and sort of reactions and what that would lead to. Like, would I go out and actually like physically kill it? Of course not. Like, that's not what I'm gonna do. Yeah. So to imply that he actually, he's kind of hinting towards that is like not a true kind of
Really a
reflection of the
hint.
picture
He's very
of
expressive. He's
explicitly
very
saying.
explicit about it. He's like, I would be dead, and then he goes, I admire that about Muslims. It's like, okay, and all Muslims are like, Allahu Akbar. He's like, that's amazing. It's like, no,
So
you
yeah,
guys
and
people not thinking like stuff at all. Like,
Swallow. And I think even with I think what struck with me was just kind of how he depicted women to be within Islam. I think like that
mm,
speaks to a very kind of Orientalist picture of how it's almost like a
exactly.
colonialist mindset, right? Because the
It is.
colonialists kind of came into the Muslim world talking about how, Francis Fanon has that kind of famous quote. I think I forgot the exact quote, but it was something to the effect of like um, women and how like they're working like they were wearing the hijab and the burqa. It was kind of like to cover their identity, and the colonialism or colonists, sorry, um, came in and wanting to take that away from them, to kind of strip them of their sort of identity in that sense, and kind of possess them in that in ownership sense. And so it's like when he's kind of echoing the kind of ideas of, oh, look at the Muslims, they just have like submissive like women and all that. It's kind of like speaking to what he wants and what kind of the sort of ideological underpinnings that he adheres to, which is like wanting women to be like quiet, reserved, and submissive, and don't question the man, which isn't like a healthy. First, it's like not a healthy relationship to be in. I don't know, like how people can kind of promote that kind of idea. Number one, number two, it's not even Islamic, right? Number
Mm,
three, it's like
mhm.
everyone is different, so it's to kind of paint things in such a manner is like a bit disturbing. So then to kind of paint that like all Muslims are like that is like it's a complete like false kind of image. And so it's like I don't know like what the reaction was when Muslims kind of listened to that, but that kind of put me like in confusion, like what's this guy saying.
Well,
But I
yeah.
don't know,
Well,
like yeah.
I think that liking Andrew Tate's views and even follow. I saw Muslims who follow him who say, "Oh, I love Andrew Tate. Thank you for sharing him." Blah blah blah. It's like, for me, it's again going back to that idea that Muslims, whenever we're lost in something, what we do instead of going to our tradition, we adopt from Westernism. So, so the reality is that when they were sharing Andrew Tate, that was actually an evidence of colonization of the mind, because these Akh-Right Muslims, especially, they are actually the Orientalist stereotype.
Yeah.
They're actually self-fulfilling prophecies
Yeah.
of Orientalist sentiment about Muslims, like
Exactly.
that we're sexual animals that can't control ourselves, and we all we want to do is dominate our women and remove them from uh, or to control them and remove them from the sphere of influence and things like this. We're just fulfilling that exact mentality. Everything that Muslims have been fighting against for the last couple of decades regarding Orientalist sentiments of the Muslim world, these guys are coming and going, no, it's all true. It's like, you're idiots. Like, it's like, thank you for ruining everyone's dawah for the past decade.
Yeah, it's almost like that inferiority complex. That's how I saw it as well. It's like Muslims are like just I don't know. It was just like they just love when white people in especially like non-Muslims of his kind of ilk of the alt-right or whatever spectrum kind of adheres to, and whatever he names himself in that sort of spectrum. It's like they love getting like sort of affirmation or validation from him, and it's like it makes us like feel good about ourselves.
I guess I think that is part of it, part and parcel, which adds to the whole idea of colonization of the mind. Um, and I think if we say that, it's going to make a lot of people angry. Not that anything else we've said is not going to make people angry, but the point is that um, I think that the bottom line here is that the red pill Akh-Right movement, and I think we'll showcase that with all the evidence that we've mentioned, is really just a manifestation of Western adoption of Western ideals and colonization of the mind, just as much as feminism is. And until they realize this, we're never going to have a true solution to feminism, because um, the irony that a lot of these Akh-Right brothers don't quite understand is that the reason that feminism came into existence was as a response to Western traditional views of gender. So if you're going to adopt Western traditional views of gender, you're only going to make what? More feminist.
Mm. Yeah.
So you're not going to stop feminism by adopting the thing that they're reacting to.
And you mentioned there was a second video. I think I saw that as well of Andrew Tate. Like there was the main one that went viral, and there was another one he spoke about Muslims and something. And you posted it on your social media, I think.
Yes, I did. I have it here actually. If you want to share, it's on his. It's somebody actually posted a montage on their Instagram, and it actually affirmed everything that I was saying about not sharing this guy's views because his perception of what it means to be Muslim, what it means to solve gender problems, is firmly rooted in his kufr ideas. Like, he said, he basically says in that, and I have. Can I share it with
Yeah,
you?
yeah, share it.
Very good.
I
So
don't know
you
if
can
yeah,
can't
maybe
I
you can
can't
play. I don't know if you can hear. Would be able to hear through the mic,
can
but
I share
just try.
my screen? No. Okay.
No, you can't share the screen. But I think if you just play it on your computer,
Okay. I'll play it right now.
you just see if it.
They're trying to shame
Yeah,
you.
it comes up. I can hear it.
Ellis. They try and shame you into pretending that the way you act is abnormal. You just want to fuck all these girls. There's something wrong with you. You're immature. I'm a fucking full grown man. I want to put my dick where I want to put my dick. Ain't nothing to do with you, bitch. Because men can do what they want. Women can't cheat, but men can. We all know this. I'm Muslim now. Everyone knows men can fuck whoever they want, but a woman's not allowed. Let's not even get into that.
So that's the first thing he says. So
Yeah,
he says, basically Muslim men can cheat, but women can't,
yeah,
which is, completely false.
of course.
They try and shame you.
Let's go to the next one.
As many dicks as you want. You ain't gonna lose your family, baby. Fuck you now. Will's a punk, man. I'm taking him to Qatar and he's gonna convert to Islam with me. If he was Muslim, no Muslim man would put up with this crap. This is why I am now officially, it's on Tate speech now, officially. I am changing my name to Abu Andrew. We're going to change Tate speech now, Muslim Tate speech. I want to put a Muslim banner. We are now a Muslim channel. I can't say my camera guy's name. Akbar. You're Akbar. I'm Abu. Akbar. We are changing this to a Muslim channel now. This video has converted me to Islam because no Muslim man would put up with this crap. Only a Western man would listen to this. Imagine a Muslim wife sitting there in her burqa trying to say this crap. But the way I was feeling different inside, and I had to psychological. You get stoned. You're about to feel.
Okay.
Whoa.
Then keep going.
There's no way for us to love each other without me sucking dick. Any relationship, there's no way for us to find a deeper thing of love without fire. I need to suck dick for us to love each other. Look, that's enough. That's enough for her. Listen, my name is Abu Andrew now. This is now a pro-Islamic channel. I've decided that the West is finished. It's done. It's over. I've said it a million times. There's nothing we can do to save it. Christians are complete pussies. Christians ain't done shit. They burned Notre Dame. They did nothing. A Rwandan immigrant burnt that church in France last week. Are the Christians marching? Christians don't care. Christians are complete pussies. Guess who else is a Christian? Will Smith. Adultery is in the Bible. You're not allowed to be adulterous. It says in the Bible to put her ass.
But then he preaches about adultery. So, it's okay for him to cheat.
Walking contradiction.
Yeah, he's a walking contradiction. The thing is, he doesn't really care about Islam or Muslims, or he doesn't really value us. What he values is his Western sentiments and his dominance over women, and he believes that Muslims are more in line with that than others. So for him, it's like violence against women and cheating and all these things are perfectly okay under our viewpoints, under Islam. So I don't see why people are sharing him, because he has a very perverse understanding of what it means to be a Muslim and what Islam actually says about gender. For him, and I think I pointed this out in my post, I said, any person who promotes any kafir who promotes Islam, but thinks not because it's true, but because he thinks it conforms to his ideas, that should be a red flag. Because any kafir who promotes Islam should be ashamed of himself before, as he's promoting it. He shouldn't be like, yeah, this is like awesome, and like you know, and then people in the comment section would bring up Abu Lahab. Well, Abu Lahab said good things about Islam. I'm like, in opposition to what he wanted. Yes, he did claim it was true, but he didn't like, oh yeah, Islam completely like, supports my tribalism. Like, it's ridiculous. These people are just ridiculous. I don't understand what they're trying to do promoting these guys.
Yeah, and even with the whole sort of dynamic when it comes to this discussion, it's like someone like Andrew Tate actually, like, if anything, instrumentalizes. I think this is like actually an interesting kind of discussion as well in general. Like, even like, within philosophical discussions and whatnot, it's just the idea that when a group, for example, instrumentalizes you certain, like, it could be fields of knowledge, or instrumentalizes facts or ideas and all that to suit their own sort of agenda. It's like you can't just kind of side with them because they, from your perspective, they think that they're actually using Islam, and for some reason you have to kind of adhere to that. But it's only kind of using it as a tool to kind of suit their agenda in a very selective way. Not to say like he's even being Islamic, because as we unpack, like, it's more of an orientalist understanding, all that. But just in general, the kind of general idea of people kind of instrumentalizing, could be knowledge or certain ways of thinking. Like, even in the sort of red pill sort of dynamic, you have that kind of evolutionary biology. You have that kind of
that's something else we forgot to touch up on.
Exactly, and there's also like biological determinism, like utilizing all these kind of fields of knowledge to kind of suit their sort of
that's what
outlook
makes
and
me
perception.
mad more than anything. And I think there is the reason that certain cultures are attaching themselves to these very biological arguments as well, is because previously, when certain areas were colonized, this was a sort of sentiment that was brought to them there and kind of infused into the culture. So if I can be so blunt without sounding too insulting, most of the time, especially from these Akh-Right, you'll hear it's always the same thing about women. How old are they? How many kids can they make?
Yeah.
And what was the other thing? I think that's it. Aside from skin color,
Hypergamy in some sense, like they'll kind of
hypergamy,
just
but at the same time, but really, it's like, most of the time, it's about women in their prime. It's always about women reaching a certain age. That's when their value goes down, and it's like, when I keep seeing these arguments, I'm like, oh my god, like,
yeah.
are you serious? You think the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would talk about women just like in this manner, like, just,
Subhanallah.
oh well, she reached her prime, so she's no
Yeah.
longer, you know, sufficient to get married.
Yeah.
Um, Same ring with divorce women. It's like they're used. You hear the used goods, like, a stuff for a lot. Oh
Astaghfirullah,
God,
yeah.
like, imagine you said that about the companions and their wives and the prophet's wives and stuff. Like, oh my God,
Yeah.
they don't consider this. Well, no, that was back then. No, that's not an argument. And if the prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would not say this, you don't say it. You don't look at
Yeah.
women like that. And then the counter argument is like, are you shaming me for my preferences? No, I'm shaming you because you're shaming people. You're shaming women who are divorced. You're shaming women who are older. You're shaming women who aren't married yet. You have a preference for a virgin? Go ahead. I'm not going to knock it. That's not haram. It's halal to have a preference. It's fine. But if you're going to go around saying that other women who are not like that are not worthy or unbefitting of marriage, that is against Quran and Sunnah.
Yeah.
Like,
Subhanallah, yeah.
astaghfirullah,
Yeah, and even like we know, like so many of the, like, for example, Sahaba, like divorce, it's like unthinkable to kind of have that line of thinking in general. That's number one. Number two, it's like I always found, I guess, the sort of ideals that I guess the Akh-Right sort of adhere to in when you just mentioned in terms of like being used goods if one is divorced as a female. It's kind of like just borrowing from that kind of Victorian era kind of Christendom where because within that kind of old school kind of Christendom, divorce was seen as such like a taboo kind of topic, subject, or thing to do. And so perhaps, people can kind of interpret it as that's why perhaps in the Muslim community we have this kind of stigma when it comes to divorce, is because we kind of borrowed from kind of the ideals of the colonizers, for example. And so like, we know within our tradition, this was never kind of the situation. We didn't have this kind of attitude towards divorce. But then for some reason, it's like, we've seen it, creep up within the Muslim community, that, they have these sort of attitudes when it comes to, people who are divorced, which is like, it's very shocking and sad to see,
I
unfortunately.
think it's not just divorce, because if you talk about the Victorian era, I mean, yeah, there were some religious sort of social status elements involved in that, but it's also, and women would be shamed for being divorced. Don't get me wrong, but I think it's also the sentiment that the specific wording is very implies a certain idea of women as well. Whereas women would be dishonored because they were divorced, they would be seen as no longer socially relevant or somehow having done something wrong from a Victorian standpoint. From what I see in certain Muslim cultures, they don't see the same way. They see women as being used goods, and that's more like the object, as an object that has
Mm,
been defiled, that is no longer able to be, like, sort of like a lower caste,
mm,
almost like like literally. um I mean the literal meaning of used goods, it just implies that the woman is an object that has been used by
yeah, yeah,
another member and no longer has any value because she's no longer sexually viable. She's no longer sexually, it's like that was her only reason for her existence, was to be deflowered.
swallow,
Like, I'm sorry, it's disgusting.
yeah,
Like, even in the West, for all the flack the Westerners get for sleeping around and stuff, they don't look at women like that.
yeah,
But well, the Western traditionals do, the red pill people do, because they're going back to that sentiment. But for most modern Westerners, for as much as we can bash about sexual ethics, nobody looks at a divorced woman or a woman who had sex before as being less valuable or being used. You know, like,
yeah.
that's just disgusting mentality.
Exactly, and unfortunately, yeah, there are segments within our own community that kind of view it in that manner, which is like, I guess, it's uh, for the rest of the community to call that out on that sort of behavior in general. And so I wanted to also ask, like, taking a slightly different turn, like you mentioned a sort of figure, kind of the red pill persuasion within the Muslim community. Have you found, just in your sort of experience in Dawah, where perhaps a lot of perhaps Muslim figures in the community, or leaders potentially, or any Dawah figures that kind of have sort of like adhere to that sort of persuasion of the red pill persuasion?
Yes, I mean, we already know who they are. Even though they try to bring in nuance from occasions to sort of um, buffer a lot of the criticisms that go towards them, the reality is that they borrow extensively from a lot of this red pill ideology. So, for example, the most obvious of them being is Daniel Hakikaju. I think he's at the forefront of this. And then you have like Al Romani and some other individuals. I mean, they're not that many, but they're significant on social media in terms of how they try to try to promote these ideas. And some of them are worse than others, but primarily I think it's Daniel Hakikaju who's trying to lead the banner here with respect to trying to instill red pill ideology into the rest of us. Um, and he's heavily affected by Western ideals in general. In fact, I mean, if you look at a lot of his arguments, even, and I've dissected them in the past, he's heavily influenced by a lot of postmodern ideology. Um, so, if you want to go into detail about what that, about him, we can. But a lot of people are going to be angry at you. So, because I know a lot of
uh,
people idealize him as some sort of like perfect alpha male figure for some strange reason. So,
Yeah, because I think it's that kind of compassionate Imam, like speaking as it is, sort of mentality
that's how
that
it
I
is.
think people think that it is Islamic, and is holding back from the truth.
That's
It's
the
like,
irony,
yeah,
though. The irony is that when they say speaking like it is, right, and they say the same thing about Trump, right, even though he's a compulsive liar. The thing about speaking like it is that they're actually not speaking it like it is. They're actually not speaking like it is. And then let me explain what that means. A lot of these individuals who admire him for saying it like it is don't understand what that means. They conflate saying it like it is with being crude and simplistic. So let me give you an example. So, for example, at one point, I think on his Twitter, he was trying to be funny and crude at the same time during, I think it was like Gay Pride something month or a few years ago or something. So he had a meme where he shows this guy base jumping. And he said, in celebration of Gay Pride Month or something, we're going to base jump or whatever. And, he's implying that, throw gays off buildings and kill them. And everyone's like commending him, he's just saying it like it is. And they're claiming that other imams or other scholars, etc., or students of knowledge who have these very lengthy articles about how to treat gays in the West or how to treat gays in general from the entire fiqh, like the comprehensive fiqh tradition, right? Like, they're being compassionate imams. They're being too complex. They're beating around the bush. They're not saying it like it is. Therefore, they're liberals and they're compassionate imams. Blah 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 blah. But the reality is, no, they're saying it like it is because they're giving you the whole picture. The guy who's being crude and giving you that one picture, literally in this case, is not saying it like it is because he's reducing the tradition to this one image. The reality is he's the one covering what the tradition says. And you're saying he's saying it like it is because you're too lazy and incompetent to understand that there's more to this, to what Islam says about this issue. That's the problem. That's the reality. So no, he's not saying it like it is. You've bought into that idea because you're intellectually lazy. That's the reason why. It's the same reason that Trump supporters think Trump is saying it like it is because they're too willfully ignorant and intellectually lazy to understand anything beyond a meme. That's the reality. And I know that sounds offensive to some people, but it's the truth. And now I'm saying it like it is. If you don't like it, too bad. So,
no, that was mashallah, really well said. And I think even it just speaks to kind of disservice that such people are doing to the tradition, especially like how vast and the sort of multi-layered, kind of faceted kind of approach to how our deen operates and how diverse it is, and the diversity and the scholarship that is within our tradition. It's like this kind of conversation in of itself is nuanced, and our tradition has a lot to say about it. And so it's like when you have to kind of, you can't just as you just mentioned, reduce it to sort of one picture. It's about kind of highlighting the nuanced takes and scholarships, because that's how our tradition is. Even like with the philosophical sort of schools of thought, there's diversity there. It's not just like one thing. Islam isn't just like one thing that's like just given to you and like a what I mean?
It's also, we have to understand the different context in which we live. I mean, you can't apply the had in a non-Islamic state, right? So this idea that it was only one way we treat homosexuals or people who commit sodomy. It's like, no, actually, there isn't. Because if you're living in London, for example, you don't just start going around killing people who happen to violate the Sharia, right? You just go around lashing people because they violate Sharia. You can't do that. Right? There are certain laws that you have to live under. There's certain restrictions depending on where you live, how you live, when you live, what the circumstances are. That's our fiqh. That's usulul fiqh. So if your whole idea of homosexuality, LGBT, is throwing people off buildings, and you want to apply that universally, then I'm sorry, there's no truth behind your behaviors or your sentiments. Like, that's not Islam.
Yeah, exactly. What's your sort of also like with the whole LGBTQ kind of issue? There's that sort of obsession, even in some those kind of segments, even like the Akh-Right, like there's that kind of obsession to, I don't know, just bring back those kind of Islamic rulings that were, did happen to be in our sort of tradition, apply it now, and kind of act as if they're kind of implementing Islam now, and sort of kind of having the discourse through that and only that. And I don't know, I feel like it's almost unhealthy, because I've seen a lot within
I think
online
it is an
sphere.
unhealthy obsession, but not for those reasons per se. I think that look, I've I'm a traditional Muslim, so I see the LGBT narrative to be problematic. I see that the imposition of this in certain places in the world in terms of education towards youth is problematic. I think these are things that need to be addressed and need to be combated on an ideological level. I agree with that, and that's fine. And if that's your niche, okay, good for you. But if you're utilizing that, if everything you ever post is that, if it's like you're treating that like those are the Mongols invading Muslim lands, like, yeah, I think that there's a problem there because that makes such a not insignificant, but almost minor issue with respect to all the other issues that Muslims are facing, especially in the West. Like that is an issue, but it's not the issue. And when you're making it the issue, it showcases that there's, for me, it's ulterior motives. There's something else going on behind the scenes that is affecting you, motivating you to constantly focus on this. Uh, Especially in the United States, where and in Europe, where a lot of these Akh-Right individuals live and thrive. Um, we have huge issues of Islamophobia, violence against Muslims. We have huge issues of the government trying to impose laws upon us, especially like in France, where we can't even worship properly. We can't even do the basics without being, criminalized. And you're concerned about rainbow flags in Target, like, really?
Yeah.
like and you want to talk about, well, this is an issue about sex, it's a problem, zina is a huge problem. Okay, well, and the reason I brought up Target is because, for example, a lot of these Akh-Right figures, I remember when Gay Pride Month was happening, and so they started saying, oh, Target. You know what Target is, right? that
Yeah, yeah.
that's that store. They're showing they have a whole section of LGBT, and there's rainbow stuff everywhere. Stuff for the law, they're trying to influence us. They're trying to impose all this on our children. That should be the least of your concerns when you walk into Target, because the first thing I see, and I try to move my gaze away from in Target, is all the half naked women on the walls. That's far more influential towards somebody committing zina than seeing rainbow flags everywhere. I mean, and and this whole sensationalism is ridiculous, because if you really wanted to combat this ideology, the first thing you do is you don't flip out about it and act
Yeah.
like it's the biggest thing in the world. I mean, if you're an immigrant or you're a second generation living in the West, it should not be shocking to you at all that a liberal establishment like Target would have rainbow flags displays during LGBT month or
Exactly.
any other such things. It's like, I mean, what are you expecting when you walk into Target? You're going to see pictures of Mufti Mank everywhere saying Subhanallah. Like, what are you looking for? Like, like this, and if you react in this way, you're not going to help your children. Like, if I walk into Target and it's LGBT month, and my daughter happens to see the rainbow stuff, and she goes, "Daddy, what's that?" You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say, "Well, that's the symbol for LGBT, and we don't agree with it because it's not part of our religion." And then we just walk away. I don't go posting about it on Facebook and acting like my daughter has now been infected with an ideology, because the moment you fear, you show this sort of fear and this sensationalism. You're not going to, you think the children, especially those who live in the West, are going to be like, oh, my dad's got a point, my parents have a point. No, the Western mentality, especially among the youth, is that the moment you show fear of something or you sensationalize, they go towards that thing because they see that there's a problem with you. Like, that's the Western mentality among the youth. They don't go, oh,
Yeah.
oh, that makes sense. No, no, no. They go, that person, why are my parents scared of this? There must be something to this.
Yeah.
That's their first mentality. That's the first thing that comes to their mind.
Yeah, I think it's almost like a natural reaction. If anything, it's like this kind of unhealthy obsession. It's like, why would they have that unhealthy obsession? Let me kind of look into it. So it's like it makes it even more curious for them.
Well, I
If
think it
anything.
actually, if you want to know my personal as to why they do it, again, it's going to sound controversial. It's going to make some people angry, but I think that there is a non-Islamic hatred of gay people among certain Muslim societies.
Mm,
And when I mean to say that, they're like, well, that makes sense. That sounds like a contradiction. How can you have a non-Islamic hatred of? It's a hatred of gay people not based in Islamic scripture. It's a hatred of gay people and LGBT based in cultural sentiment rather than looking at our fiqh and our tradition. It's the idea that gay people, by virtue of them being gay, by virtue of them existing, should be killed or punished or seen as inferior. When the
Yeah.
reality is, Islam only looks at the sin; it doesn't look at the individual as that, as the one that is devalued.
Yeah.
And what I mean to say in terms of fiqh, in terms of punishment, etc. So, like for example, we don't punish gay people in Islam; we punish sodomy.
Yeah.
Okay, and for some reason, Muslims can't differentiate. Many Muslims can't differentiate between these two things.
Yeah.
So, I think that the reason that, for example, Daniel and others focus so much on LGBT is because they are, what is it? The word I'm looking for? They're capitalizing on that hatred that is very prevalent among certain segments of the Muslim population,
Yeah.
and
And
they get views from it.
yeah. Yeah, that's the big one. They get a lot of views from it, and in general as well, like that kind of sentiment does also like there's parallels with that, and also like the red pill culture because for example, the pill culture might look at things in a more sort of family traditional values, which we don't even like Muslims. We don't like I guess disagree, but then it's like for them that kind of visceral reaction to homosexuals or people committing sodomy and all that. It's like it's stemmed from that, and I see like Muslims sort of share that same viewpoint from that lens and also kind of almost like build bridges with that sort of people and people within that kind of red pill spectrum. It's like, oh look, Muslims have this kind of family values and have this sort of attitude towards LGBTQ, and look at them, it's like the same thing, and there's like parallel there kind of thing.
But there's a problem with the Akh-Right because you can see it in their reaction. I mean, if you look at these videos on LGBT and stuff, there's get millions of views. There are so many, there's that visceral reaction. You get all of these comments talking about, supporting it and stuff. But the moment there's a video about kufr, by kufr is wrong, it gets like a third of the views. The Muslim
Yeah.
reaction is not even nearly as visceral. And then that's also in real life. Muslims walking by Christmas trees or seeing Jesus on a cross or seeing, they don't go, oh, astaghfirullah, take pictures and post it on Facebook. You're like, look how they're trying to influence us, and if your reaction to kufr is less than your reaction to homosexuality, there's something wrong with your aqidah.
Mm.
I'm gonna be frank with you.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I'm not saying that we should go around being sensationalist and acting like that anyway, but my point is like, if you're more angry about two guys having sex than you are about people practicing kufr,
Yeah, something wrong.
then then you're off. Like
Yeah.
you don't understand. You're off on your religious views. Like,
Yeah, and it's interesting because I guess like when they try to build bridges with people in the red pill spectrum or within the manosphere, it's like they're on kufr, like either like atheists or kind of maybe traditional,
yeah,
maybe Christians potentially. So it's like, what are you trying to do essentially in that sense as well?
that's funny. Yeah, well, let's share a video by some Christian kafir, who promotes the ideas we like. But if God forbid, if the person's gay, then then that showcases that you're a liberal and that you're a deviant, right? It's so backwards. It's like, oh, so it's okay to share the kafir guy, the straight up kafir. But if you share something from a homosexual, oh, then that's the problem. It's like, because kufr is definitely not as bad as being a gay person.
Yeah, subhanallah.
Silly stuff in a way. This is crazy.
Yeah, it's. But I guess the counter argument would be like, oh, Ahlul Kitab, and the look at the Quran, it
It's
kind
still
of,
kufr.
yeah,
Like okay, I bring this counter argument. If a Muslim commits sodomy, is he still Muslim?
yeah. If he believes in
Yes.
like Islam and stuff, yes,
Yes, he's still Muslim. But if a Muslim
yes,
commits kufr, is he still Muslim?
no,
Major kufr, kufr akbar,
yeah, yeah. He's out of the fold.
an apostate. So
Yeah,
there's your fiqh. Like, and then that's the thing. It's like, these guys, they don't get it. They have more hatred towards an act of zina than they do towards kufr, which showcases, again, that their head is not in the right place. So,
yeah. It's sort of a skewed perception of things, which is sort of unfortunate. But inshallah, like, these kind of conversations can bring it to light more, because I don't actually see much. I don't know, like, have you found that experience as well? Because I know when I was messaging you, like, on WhatsApp, it was like, you're like, oh, not many people talk about it like this, looking forward to it,
They
something to
don't. I
that
don't
effect.
think.
Yeah.
I think that the sentiments that we're talking about right now are there. I think among the majority, but they're not voicing them because either they're scared to deal with these people, or they just haven't constructed their thoughts in such a way that they feel that they can express them, or they even feel that they have any sort of clout or influence enough to do so. Because on the social media sphere, the Akh-Right are very powerful because this is where they congregate. They don't have any other power elsewhere, right? So yeah, I think that there's a silent majority, so to be frank with you, regarding what we're saying. And I think that they're looking for a more balanced, more Islamic approach to these issues. Um, because if you look at all the traditionally learned, most of them at least, traditionally learned scholars and students of knowledge, they're not buying into this Akh-Right nonsense. They don't
Mm,
support these people, even. I mean, like I said, you look at Daniel Hakikaju and others, they are they are ostracized in the real world as well as online. Like, they're basically by themselves.
yeah.
They get very little support from like some Dio Bundys. That's
Yeah.
about it. But otherwise, people don't like, and it's not because, oh, we just don't like the way that they behave. It's like, well, that's part of it, and that's a major issue. But it's also because a lot of their ideas are based in deviancy, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's like a really important point to highlight. It's like, I don't know if they don't realize it. It's because like they're capitalizing on like the sort of fame, and they know that it'll get the views when it
well,
comes
they don't
to
care, which is even worse.
SubhanAllah.
So I'd rather say they're ignorant of it than, because if they're not ignorant of it and they're doing it anyway, then that's even a worse sin.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Like that's super unfortunate for like in that sense. And I also want to also touch on the point. I think like, yeah, we're bashing Akh-Right, and rightly so, but there's that kind of flip side in some ways when it comes to the manosphere culture, in the sense that there is that level of yes, they kind of have this misogynistic outlook on women, like in the sense of promoting only like the idea that perhaps hypergamy within women is like the norm, if anything. It becomes a very like degrading way, and like sort of puts the spotlight on the women and sort of outlines, oh, like this is all the problematic things we find, and kind of trying to paint themselves as on the right wavelength, and it's like them that's the issue. It's kind of that kind of mindset that it sort of projects, which is unfortunate. However, what I sort of do maybe understand in some sense is like that kind of idea of, like, for example, in Western culture and Western society, just going to university, and this isn't even if like, I guess Muslims even go through this, but non-Muslims as well. It's like there's that kind of guy that was looked down, I don't know, within school, or his peers didn't get the girls, for example. And so it's like when he kind of bases his kind of self-worth through that, it's like he's not in a good place, and he needs that sort of level of empowerment in some ways. And so I can kind of empathize in some ways. It's like they may at times kind of gravitate towards these groups in the sense of trying to find that empowerment, and being in that kind of building that sort of confidence or self-confidence. And so for me, I think what I would do when it comes to encountering such people, because I do feel there are like people in that kind of spectrum, is like not sort of you know have my own sort of or sort of outline my own principles. I'm using Islamic tradition, even like from psychology and different archetypes of people, kind of empowering themselves in the sense of balancing, if they need to be more courageous, like balancing that, rather than kind of focusing too much on, I don't know, the sort of outlook of it being solely the sort of girl's fault, and we have to kind of figure them out, and then like have that sort of mindset. So I want to get your take on that sort of perspective as well.
I I agree. I think that with that sentiment about being more empathetic towards certain segments of that Akh-Right sphere, or even in general, even though we have been bashing them largely, but I want to explain why in a moment. But so first, I want to look at the feminism. The women, our sisters going towards feminism. And in many ways, I think that the best way to resolve that issue is to sort of teach them the Islamic tradition and to empathize with a lot of the issues they've gone through. Okay, in terms of how they've been treated, especially within the Muslim community, why they felt forced to go down that route, because and that's something that I think the Akh-Right also gets wrong a lot too, is that they try to cover this. They try to act as though there's no responsibility on the end of Muslim men with respect to how these women see the Islamic tradition and see Islam in general, and see feminism, because so like a lot of these arguments go around saying, well, the main reason our sisters are becoming feminists is because they're going to university. It's not because a lot of men treat them like crap.
Yeah, yeah,
And that we don't teach them Islam properly. But the reality is that a lot of their lived experiences is the reason why they gravitate towards feminism. So we need to be more empathetic towards them. In the same light, I think that there are a lot of brothers who go towards the manosphere, and they go towards the red pill because of how they've been mistreated as well within society and culture with respect to their position as men. Um, and I do think it's, and for some of them, for those of them who have, for example, experienced a bad divorce and they've had everything taken from them, they've had their children taken from them and stuff. I think that yes, we should empathize with those people. We should try to show them what Islam says about the issues. We should tell them that they've been mistreated, and that and here's the solution for these things, right? But then when we talk about another segment, I think of, especially of youth who have not experienced a lot of these things, like some 14, 15, 16-year-old kids who just think that it's awesome to be on the red pill spectrum, right? I think that's more of an issue of them lacking empathy for their sisters. I think it's more of an issue of them trying to uh, what is it, justify certain cultural sentiments towards women than it is about anything else. um, because if we're going to say the red pill is a reaction to feminism, if we don't recognize that feminism is a reaction to sort of that red pill mentality to begin with, the Western traditional understanding of gender, um, then it's hard to be empathetic with these individuals. It is difficult because it's sort of like they're asking us to be empathetic, or they're asking us to sympathize with them when they are the arbiters of their own problems.
yeah.
It's like, well, we need to stop feminism, so let's adopt the thing that the feminists are reacting to. It's
Mm.
like, well, that's not that's not how it works. It's like, bro, like let's hate them more and make them feel even more inferior. That's how we're going to stop feminism. It's like, no, dude.
Yeah.
um,
I, I think just to kind of counterpoint, because like when it comes to like feminism, I'm a bit more like I've talked about on the podcast a lot. I think people tend to depict it in one particular manner, which is pretty much feminist ideals is values that automatically contradict Islam. And so women are going towards feminism because, I don't know, feminism tells you to, I don't know, take off the hijab or something. I'm just making that up, but that's kind of the sort of depiction of feminism. So it's like when someone says, "Hey, I don't know, Muslim women are going towards feminism," I think the picture in the mind is already something that um, is like straight away, anti, I don't know,
it's not like,
most yeah, anti-Islamic in that sense. But for me, like, I don't see it as that, because like I guess if you're talking about like gender studies specifically, it's a lot more nuanced in the sense of like historical analysis of what women went through, or even how at times like we can observe this phenomena, like for example, on the minbar, there's like um, sheikhs, promoting like misogyny subtly. Like for example, it could be like they quote the hadith about more women in hellfire, all that kind of stuff. And so I think when it comes to these kind of topics, it's a bit more like nuance in that sense. And so that's why, like, I think I'm in a bit disagreement, I guess, in terms of like how feminism is kind of depicted, and I guess the angle you're coming from, because I come from a sort of different angle. But not to say that obviously like there is like, for example, white liberal feminism is going to definitely be like un-Islamic. I don't even like, that's not the question. I guess it's more about because even with feminist literature discourse, there was opposition to colonization. Like my sort of research was when it comes to gender studies was essentially the role of Aboriginal feminists and how they had to fight the government and the system in order to get their rights. So like point is like there's a lot more nuance when it comes to like women that sort of utilize that label in that sense. So that's why
Yeah.
even when it comes to like that mental picture of like automatically like feminism means like I don't know, something anti-Islamic. I think that image is not the case for many people in general. So there's a lot more nuance in that sense. So that's I just wanted to highlight that's just sort
I
of
would agree with what you're getting across, but let me clarify again why I uh, presented feminism in that light. So yes, there is an essentialization of feminism within this discourse, in that it's focusing primarily on the ideology, or at least the very basic ideology promoted by Western sort of white liberal women. Okay, that's basically what I was referring to.
yeah.
That said, I agree with you that the words and how it's depicted, and even the ideology it's depicted, is very nuanced among people who use it. I would agree with that sentiment. For example, if a sister saying she's a feminist, it doesn't always mean the same thing. Some women just mean they're just fighting for their rights. So they think feminism is a good word to adopt to represent that. Some women actually do believe that feminism, the word that they're using, is just referring to Islamic values about women.
Mm.
That there is that, and then there are those women who actually borrow that white liberal mentality, and that they consider them feminists, right?
Yeah.
And of course, even within feminism, there are obviously on the periphery there are differing views, but there are foundational assumptions, of course, within their foundational constructs within the ideology in general. So I agree with that sentiment, and that we have to be careful when we critique feminist, not feminism per se, but feminist, because I think that they all have very different viewpoints about what that means, or very perspectives on what that means. So I agree with that sentiment. I'm not opposed to that at all. We may still disagree on largely what feminism may mean, um, objectively, or outside of those subjective views. But I would agree with you that it's used differently. So we have to be cautious with respect to how we address a lot of these sisters, or even address the subject in general. Um, yeah,
Yeah, because even with like the red pill culture and the manosphere, the assumption is like the whole world is becoming feminism a feminist in their sort of depiction of what they deem to be feminist. I don't know, and so their reaction is to like they women have to be kind of oppressed in some ways and subjugated to the homes, that kind of like reaction because of the kind of overwhelming feminism, and
oh
as
yeah,
we sort of unpacked at the beginning anyway. But it's almost like the foundational aqidah in that sense. So it's like the world is becoming too feministy, and
yeah.
we need to like bring back the masculinity in
That's
society.
something
And
that
as
we
we
have
unpacked,
to.
it's a bit more nuanced with the sort of society that we're in as well. So
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is too, that I should have mentioned earlier, is like this whole obsession with these topics. I mean, when your entire Islam, when your entire religion becomes a reaction, there's a huge issue. Um, there's a huge problem there, because now you're not building anything. All you do is destroy, right? And so you're going to, and inevitably, and this happens a lot. And Nietzsche, I think, hinted at this as well. When you stare into the abyss long enough, it stares back into you, right? You become the very monster you're trying to fight. And the thing that's really ironic about all this, not just the adoption of this Western idealism with respect to gender, but the adoption of liberalism, because liberalism itself is a reactionary movement. So when their whole Islam is based on being reactionary towards these other ideologies, oh, we're going to save Islam by just attacking. It's the reality is you're actually fulfilling that liberal project. You're fulfilling that liberal mentality and liberal sentiment, of simply being a reaction, trying to free yourself from what you consider to be oppressive. But when it's all done, and said, and you've fought your enemy and it's gone, you have nothing left.
yeah.
There's
Yeah,
nothing there.
that's actually a really good point you brought up. I forgot to mention that like reactionary politics, it's like as a Muslim community, if you're only going by reactionary politics. It's like you don't have any sort of legs to stand on. You're just sort of going whatever's coming up, and especially when it's sort of all in the similar basket in the sense of LGBTQ and how our reaction is to that and everything. It's like I feel that even it's interesting you brought up the kind of liberal project and that being like reactionary. Could you maybe expand that a bit more? Like, what was it a reaction from? How does it like sort of
Liberalism? Well,
in that sense?
liberalism has always been. It was originally a reaction to institutionalized religious oppression in Europe, and well, what became the United States. So secular liberalism was simply trying to call for freedom from monarchical and other powers that were based in religious institutions, especially the Catholic Church. Okay, so that's really it. So freedom for the people, and they would still even appeal to God, saying that God created all people equal. So, for example, we look at the United States Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal by their creator. So it's sort of a reaction to this idea that the king has divine right, right? That God only gave power and value to the king to rule over other people, right? And that's why freedom of religion is considered a big, even though that's really a lot of contradictions in that sentiment as well nowadays, especially freedom of religion is a big deal in liberalism because it's a reaction to the idea that the church was in power over everyone in terms of what they could think and believe.
Mm,
So it's really a reaction to the oppression of institutionalized Christianity and monarchy. That's really
yeah,
what it is. That's all it was. And then when they, that's what liberalism. That's literally what liberalism. So they say individualism is representative of liberalism. Well, yes, but individualism is also reaction.
yeah.
It's a
That's
reaction to the idea that the individual doesn't matter in the grand scheme. Um,
that's really yeah. That's
so
a really fascinating point because, like, just to, I guess, if we're talking about reactionary politics, so there's that kind of Christendom, strict sort of way of ruling, and then liberalism came, and then naturally, I guess, would you say the reaction that some segments, it could be like the Akh-Right or other segments within the community, it's like they're wanting to almost go back to that the
yeah, they
Christendom sort
do.
of
They
reaction.
want to readopt those sentiments. The thing is too is that we don't understand about liberalism. A lot of people don't understand. Liberalism never happened in the Muslim world from within. It happened because it was imported, right? But Muslims never came up with this idea of being liberals. Like we never had this idea of like throughout our history that there was institutionalized religion that we had to fight against and therefore he'd free the people from. Right, the religion was ingrained within our culture and our society, where the people were already valued to such an extent where they never felt the need to do these things or to react against their governments in such a way that they had to do away with the faith or reform the faith. Like we didn't have a reform movement. Like we never had a reform movement. We reformism from a Christian perspective didn't occur within the Muslim world until the reformism didn't happen in the Muslim world until like what, the 18th 19th century. No, not later than that, 19th and 20th century. And that's when the caliphate was completely dismantled and colonization kicked in high gear. Right, so this whole liberal sentiment is really a Western phenomenon.
Yeah, because even when it comes to like the church, we can kind of unpack this. The way it's really fascinating because the way the West had to endure. For example, not simple things like not even having access to like accessible Bibles. Like that was like a big thing. Back then. It
Oh
wasn't like
God,
open to the public,
yeah,
and so it's like the way they even disseminated knowledge was like
it was very
almost like
oppressive.
it
It was a
was.
huge,
Yeah,
it was oppressive. It was all based on status and class, and it was like people couldn't even have access to their own religious text. I mean, come on.
exactly. Subhanallah. And that's sort of like obviously from the Islamic tradition, it's like once Rasul some sort of recited Quran, it's like there's no like sieving or editing process at that point, and we've always had that kind of approach where it was all accessible to the people. There was no sort of gatekeeping, if anything, when it comes to like our tradition or even our traditional texts. And so it's like we have such a vastly different approach comparing the Islamic and sort of Western civilizations. And so it's like really ironic that, because I guess when it comes to the Muslim world, we've sort of, when, as a result of, for example, capitalism and, third world countries, like, different parts of the Muslim world, um, Muslims had to like immigrate to the West in order to get a better living, and so we've succumbed to, for example, the sort of secular law and sort of have to abide by, and the sort of issues have kind of come out from that, in the sense that it's like, how do we, sort of live as Muslims in this day and age? What does that even mean? And so it's like, when we fall back into this kind of almost like conservative right approach, where liberalism is a reaction to that, but then for some reason it's like we want to go back to that, but then that wasn't even our tradition either. It was like completely
It's
different.
not.
It's like we're not actually creating anything that stands on its own legs. Rather, we're just kind of being reactionary. If anything, we have a vastly different history.
None of this so-called Dawah online or activism has any roots in our tradition, to be quite frank. It's for me, and I'm going to be very frank, most of it's deviance. Maybe unknown to a lot of these people, but it's deviance. There's a lot of deviant opinions and deviant perspectives being shared and being imposed upon Islam. And just to go back to your point before, going further with this, you know, in Islam, your class, your gender, your age, your race, ethnicity are not what makes you valuable or less valuable than another person. It's your knowledge. It's how much you know. That's our hierarchy. That's our class system, right? And that's in everyone, from the lowest person in society. The lowest person can learn to a point where they become the highest, right? That's Islam. But in Christianity, that was never the case.
Mm,
Like, you can never reach that level.
wow.
You could,
Yeah.
you were always denied access. So I think that's one of the reasons that we never had this sentiment that we needed to like rebel against religious institutions, because it's like
Yeah.
the religious institutions were always there for the people. Um,
Subhanallah.
yeah, it's not so much an irony for me that, I mean, it is an irony that, I'm trying to explain this. It's ironic, yes, that Muslims are reacting to liberalism by utilizing traditional Western concepts and constructs. But at the same time, I'm not surprised, because Muslims have been doing that for a long time now, in the
Yeah.
past 200 years. Like, even like, for example, even the scientific miracles thing,
Yeah.
like, that's a Western reaction to Western, criticisms of Islam. Like,
Subhanallah.
oh,
Yeah.
there's no, oh, the Quran is scientifically inaccurate. No, let's prove that it is scientifically accurate. It's like, well, it has nothing to do with it to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Why
Subhanallah.
are you doing, it's,
We've already like succumbed to the parameters that's set by the West, and we've sort of kind of defined Islam through that sort of parameters, and so that's when we get limited in our discourse, especially when it comes to science of the Quran, miracles in the Quran.
I think it's our own fault too. I mean, we like to blame the West all the time for all these things. It's like, well, the reality is that we're very Western in our mentalities, regardless if we want to be or not. And the problem, and it's okay to be Western, in some respects, right? I'm a Westerner, I can't get away from that. But when it comes to the negative aspects, it's our responsibility to to correct those things for the Islamic tradition. The problem here is that a lot of these youth, especially these Akh-Right types and others, to be frank, it's not because so much that they're ignorant, but that they're willfully ignorant. They're
Mm,
willfully ignorant. I just don't think they want to learn in many respects. Maybe that's because they're lazy, or but I think that there's a lot of, but it has to be said, I think there are a lot of these guys, if you showed them the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
so awesome.
they would ignore 90% of it, because it completely undermines the red pill
Yeah.
ideology. Like, they'd be like, oh yeah, the Prophet sallallahu said that, but that was back then. you
Yeah.
know they would
Subhanallah.
find an excuse not to listen. I
Yeah.
honestly, because it makes them feel like, you know um they have this inferiority complex.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. I think there's a group think mentality as well. It's like when you're around people that think similar to you, it's like you don't really get out of that? Anything kind of contrary to that kind of belief, you sort of like reject it straight away.
Yeah. And that's the problem with social media, because it creates this illusion, this illusionary bubble of a society. But social media is not real. I know that's going to scare some people, because we spend so much time on social media, we think that that's actually how reality is represented, but it's not. It's a huge exaggeration of what actually is occurring outside. I mean, if you really want to see the difference, I challenge everyone right now: get off social media for a month and watch how different your perspective of the world
Yeah,
becomes.
exactly. Yeah. Just going back to earlier point you mentioned, like I guess the Christian way of seeking knowledge versus the Islamic kind of approach, and how there wasn't that sort of class system. It was more so based on how much knowledge you have accumulated. I thought that was a really interesting, good point to touch on, because that sort of reminded me straight away of, like, for example, Bilal radiallahu anhu, who was sort of seen as, when he was a slave, it was like seen as, lowest rungs of society. But then, subhanAllah, when Islam came, he accepted Islam, he was like a governor. He ended up being like a governor. And so that's kind of the emancipatory kind of power that Islam has. And even like there's also on the side, there's like many stories where, like, famous muftis or sheikhs of the time, in the past, kings would sort of go to them and be like, learn, I want to study with you, do some private classes, because, assuming they're the king, and they're a big shot, obviously, in that sense. They just assume the sheikh will be like giving them, private lessons or whatever. But then the sheikh would actually tell them, no, come to my class, because there'll be like the poor people and stuff there at his class. He'd be like, no, you as points to the king, tells the king to like come to the class and sit with everyone else. So it's like, I found that really fascinating, as well, where there's that kind of approach when it comes to Islam and Deen, which I don't think you have it as clear cut in Christianity in that sense as well.
We also have the scholarly class were largely, at least many of the traditional scholars that we refer to today, were largely absent from government influence and power. Even if they held certain positions, they would rarely, or if never, appeal to the rulers. That's why a lot of them were jailed, right? So we had that tradition where our religion was not institutionalized to support corruption in many respects throughout history. Now, of course, it did happen at times. I mean, nobody's, the Islamic civilization is not perfect by any means. Obviously, we have a history of problems too, but generally, the scholarly class tended to avoid um, uh, politics as much as they could, or they even opposed politicians. So we have a tradition among the scholarly class, among the religious class, that does not want power, does not want to be tyrannical, does not want to oppress the people. And that's why a lot of these people, especially a lot of scholars who were jailed, were supported in mass by the people. So like that's opposed to Christianity, where this the monks and the priest were hand in hand with the emperor or the kings. And,
Mm.
you know
Even during the time of the Sira as well, we see
that's-
that as well.
yeah,
So
it's a problem system.
the Christian rulers were basically like pretty much like priests, in some sense, and all like other scholars of Christian tradition. Whereas I guess within Islam, it wasn't promoted as such, and even in that, it's like the distinction is made between making sure that for for a ruler to be in the Islamic sense, or Islamic ruler to be deemed as a good ruler, they should have that kind of sincerity and approach, and see at the feet of the scholars and learn from them if they're truly
Yeah,
like a good ruler in that sense, rather than kind of promoting sort of idea that the scholarly class have to be like the rulers and the
yeah.
scholars in Islam. So
Which is one of the reasons also why, and of course we're not Shia, uh, but sort of Iran is having a lot of problems right now among their the common people, is because their scholarly class and the government are one and the same. It's like, well,
mm,
you're basically setting yourself up for failure there, because
yeah,
eventually there's going to be a revolution. Because if we know anything from history, when you put the scholars in that sort of power and you have them corrupted, there's going to be rebellion. So
yeah. Even Iran's a sort of good case study in that sense, because we can see the reactionary it actually kind of goes back to our reactionary politics sort of approach, because you have like even before the Shah was in power, you had the Qajar dynasty that was very strict. It forced, women to like wear, to cover the, head to toe, men to be, wearing certain sort of religious, sort of uh, religious wear. And then like I think people kind of rebelled against that, and the Shah came to power, made everything westernized to the point where he's like trying to tell. He had like police people that kind of told others to like undress and wear Western clothing. So that kind of sentiment was sort of promoted, and then the sort of the religious class sort of took over because they were able to get enough support on the ground when it comes to the idea that we're becoming too westernized, we need to go back to the Islamic principles. And then the sort of reaction happened, and we can see that sort of effects in that sense. So it's like really fascinating that sort of dynamic of reactionary politics that kind of
it just keeps
emerged from
going.
that.
It's a constant cycle with Iran and other places. It's just going back and forth like ping pong, like tennis. Like they just, and that's the problem is because the culture, there's not a religious culture. The fact of the matter is you can't implement laws when the culture doesn't agree. When the culture, if you haven't infused Islam into the culture, people are going to reject. If all your politics is based on reacting to the previous regime, then of course the next generation is going to rebel against you.
Yeah,
because that's all it's going to be.
It's that sort of cycle, if anything, and that's why, yes, even from the Sirah, if we extract sort of ideas of how the sort of Dawah kind of carries off from the Meccan phase into the Medina phase, it was like setting that kind of base support of people who were kind of learning Islam, and Islam came down piecemeal, slowly, so kind of implementing the values and ethics, and then kind of building that base. And then, politically speaking, obviously made ties with, different tribes and bring them together and building that from the ground up. So it's really important to kind of foster that kind of culture. And so that's why it's like really interesting as well as kind of going back to the LGBTQ kind of discussion, where sometimes even that very reactionary approach that we have within certain segments of our Muslim community about bringing the laws back to kind of, punish them for their acts or whatever. It's like, it's very reactionary, and plus it doesn't kind of foster that, like everyone who is, no one's going to have like a sort of, positive, sort of approach when someone has that kind of such a visceral reaction straight away, especially in this kind of current climate. I think it's a bit more like, nuanced take in that sense, or sort of easing, if anything, in some ways, where it's you're going gung-ho in one manner. It's like, I just bring back these rules and go back to the Christendom era. So it becomes complicated. Yeah.
It is funny. Like I always like hearing these guys, especially since they all live in the West, which makes it even more ironic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if we bring back the Had, this will resolve all the issues. It's like, if half your population is addicted to pornography, it doesn't matter if you punish a few people for saying you need to resolve that issue first. I'm just making an exaggerated claim, but my point is, if, for example, like if you're okay with pornography in your country, or if you're not even dealing with that, if you haven't fixed the problem of zina, of people being attracted to zina in general, then punishing a homosexual person for having sex is not going to solve a problem. Nobody's going to be like, oh yeah, well, I'm not going to do that in public, but that doesn't mean they're going to still entertain it elsewhere.
Yeah.
If they don't have in their hearts that this is wrong, that there's something wrong with zina, then no matter how much you punish it, the society is still going to be geared towards that. Now, the had is meant to be a deterrent, yes, but not for everyone. How do I explain this? So, for example, if we kill a murderer, yeah, that's a deterrent, but we don't imply that because it's a deterrent that most people want to murder or have a desire to murder. This is for the most extreme elements of society, right? That's what the had is for. Is for those extreme. It's not for every citizen. Most Muslims in the past, within the traditional Islamic society, didn't have this sudden urge to go around committing zina with everyone. They may be tempted, but they didn't feel like, I have to commit zina today. Thank God the had is there. I'd be committing zina right now. No, that's not. That was for the most extreme elements of society, right? Because in a traditional Islamic society, the culture was so much that that committing zina was a shame. It was something that you can't do. It was something that was taught at a very young age that was wrong, right? But if you try to implement the had in a society where zina is considered norm, you're not going to get the reaction you think you're going to get.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like prohibition era United States.
Yeah. And you're gonna get even a crazy, more liberal reaction to that,
Yeah,
and which
because
will
what happened
continue
during
that time.
prohibition? The society, everyone loved to drink. Nobody thought it was wrong, and then
Yeah.
they banned alcohol. What do you think was going to happen? Like, you think they're all going to be like, yeah, that's fine. We're not going to drink alcohol anymore. No, the mob became extremely powerful because they were selling illegal alcohol everywhere, and everyone was trying to make their own alcohol. It got to such an extreme that the government just had to reverse it because they couldn't control the population.
Yeah, it's crazy,
You know,
subhanAllah. And I
it's like,
think, yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
what I think our Islamic kind of tradition is like when it comes to Islamic ethics or even legal system and how it sort of is implemented in this day and age. There's a lot more like nuance than people think it is initially, because they see like, okay, Islam has all these rules and regulations, like, which is fine, like I don't even disagree with that, but the point is like, especially when it within its context and how it's applied, it's not going to be the same in all generations. Like even like the kind of example I always kind of fall back to is like Umar radiallahu anhu, when he had the keys to Jerusalem, and the Muslims were sort of settling there. He didn't actually like radically sort of change all the sort of things that they were doing that isn't deemed Islamic in on our standards. This, he sort of told people to move to the outskirts of the city and settle there, and then slowly, like generation or time, like 4 or 5 years later, kind of seep into that kind of society and slowly integrate, rather than kind of
Yeah,
obviously there is like one point he did make is like, don't build new churches, and don't give like public dawah, like obviously, yeah, like there are certain things clearly the changes that were made, but I'm talking about like a complete reversal of laws and situations. Even within, like, I guess the Islamic societies, there was flexibilities of Christians kind of implementing
hmm
their own law amongst their own Christian community, etc. But there's there was, like, you can see that hikmah by Umar radiallahu anhu when it comes to these kind of situations, and the way we approach these sort of discussions, and implement political
no, I
sort of
agree.
rules. And
And it's not just among Amar, but like I said, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was the
so,
was the primary exemplar of this. And we even go back to, I brought up the analogy, the example of alcohol in the Prohibition era, but the same thing could be stated of the Muslims. Early on they were drinking, and the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam the Quran, excuse me, gradually revealed itself in such a way that it became more and more difficult to drink. But that gradual approach was effective, because had the prohibition come down early, when they were all still like drinking is fine, and they were all accustomed to drinking, how would the Muslim community have reacted then?
yeah,
And the Quran is very explicit about this too, is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it says, if you had been harsh in your methods, your message would not have been accepted, right? So this gradual approach is definitely, it's hikmah. It's how Islam should be implemented. And what's ironic about this too, or what's sad actually, is a lot of these individuals, these hardliners, what we like to call them, like, oh, we need to bring the had, we need to bring, revive the Khalifa and something like that, which I agree with to a great extent, but the way they want to do it is like immediately. It's like they don't they consider this gradualistic approach. They look at other Muslim societies who are doing this gradualistic approach, and they're saying, oh, these guys are liberals, they're
mm,
soft, they're this or that. It's like, when you say that, astaghfirullah, when you say that, you're implying that the prophetic methodology,
yeah,
in many respects, is also like what those pejoratives that you're utilizing. Because if the most liberal society was the pagan Arabs,
yeah,
you want to talk about liberals? These guys were burying their daughters alive, and their women were walking around topless.
mm,
Like it was a
yeah,
norm.
yeah,
And they were
subhanallah,
having zina. They were doing all sorts of things, gambling. You know,
yeah,
everything. There was literally idols in the Kaaba. And did the Prophet, the first thing he go, astaghfirullah, he'd say, oh, astaghfirullah, we have to do all this, ban this, do this, no, no, no. Very gradual.
exactly, yeah. there's that sort of level, like even when it comes to, like, for example, there's a famous example, Omar radiallahu anhu, when there was it was a famine, and there was obviously the
Yep.
rule of cutting the hand of the thief, but then the hikmah is, in that situation, look, people are going to be stealing, I'm not just going to go around, sort of cutting people's hands off. Even there's a process and a kind of
Yeah, of
core process
course.
to that happening. That's not I'm not questioning
Basic
that, but it's
mercy
what.
and compassion. They're starving. You start cutting
Yeah,
people's hands off, the first thing's going to do, they're going to rebel
yeah. It's
because to survive, you know,
so exactly.
right?
And so you see that kind of nuance and sort of approach. It's not to say like how I kind of view it in terms of applying, Islamic, principles or rules in this day and age might be correct, but it's just kind of alluding to the point where we can see this hikmah being, exercised within our tradition. So it's like almost contrary to that when you see like segments from the Muslim community have that sort of legalistic approach of, oh, we'll bring this rule back, we're somehow reviving Islam, but it's not that sort of black and white picture of
They're
deen.
not, and what's even strange. They don't even understand. It's like I said, I feel like a lot of these Muslims, they just don't read the Sirah. And I know
Mm.
it sounds like a very simplistic analysis, but it's so shocking to me. What were the Jews, or even the Quran? Is like, well, what were the Jews accused of above all else?
Sort
Well,
of
they
the
they
legalistic
killed.
way of
Yeah, they
looking.
were super legalistic. They had forgotten the spirit of the law. They
Yeah,
forgotten why they implemented. They've forgotten the maqasid. They've forgotten hikmah. They've forgotten all these things. They've forgotten compassion and mercy. They only cared about what the book said. You know, and if it makes you suffer, okay, that's your problem.
yeah,
Now we have Muslims like that. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have Muslims who are just super spiritual like Christians and they don't care about the law at all, right? So,
yeah. And that it's interesting you bring that. That's actually a really good point, because like that's almost a it's like a case study for us Muslims to look at and be like, look, this is what we shouldn't be, right? And staying in the Quran. But for some reason, we're sort of adapting, elements of that, which is like unfortunate in that sense as well.
yeah, well, it's just it showcases actually proof for the Quran. It's proof for Islam that if you see the condition of the Muslims today, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala uh, has essentially shown us ourselves. I mean,
Mm.
when you read the Quran, it says to reflect. What are you reflecting on? Not just about Allah and the hereafter. You're reflecting upon your own condition. So we have distanced ourselves from our own faith by becoming these extremes.
Subhanallah. Yeah, and it's actually the kind of example about Jews and the legalistic approach is a really really good one, because firstly, I get there's a legalese approach, like very legalistic understanding, but we know we can. The other kind of point, the Quran alludes to is kind of they sort of pick and choose conveniently as well.
Mm.
Many stories in regards to that, and so it's like really fascinating where bringing it back to the sort of example about potentially like the Akh-Right. I think we alluded to this, where it's like almost like that pick and choose dichotomy in the society that we live in. It's like, for example, you mentioned going to university and studying. It's like, but the female can't, but then the male can. It's very selective understanding or the interpretation of, I don't have to exactly go to university. I can just be like a different job and not do university, but they have to somehow go to university because of, necessity and all these sort of things. It's almost like a pick and choose kind of situation at that point.
Yeah. It's funny too. It's like, well, no. Well, we need to become doctors and engineers. Like, no, you don't. You can become a welder. Go
Yeah.
become a welder. They make decent money. No, no,
Plumber
no.
as
That
well.
doesn't. Huh?
Plumber as well. Like in Australia,
They
plumbers
make good
make
money.
money.
Contractors make good money. And those are all. I mean, you can learn in an environment when it's only men. So why don't you do that? No, 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 no. My mom and dad want me to become a doctor. Well, that's not a necessity, is it?
So
See, I'm sorry. I'm poking the bear here.
yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. No, I thought the kind of the Jews and how it's Allah describes them in the Quran. I think that's a really interesting parallel there, yeah, in the sort of legalistic sort of approach as well. I wanted to also ask. I didn't probably ask this earlier, but in terms of even like the whole Jordan Peterson phenomenon, I think that's an interesting discussion point of
hmm,
itself. Where you have, I don't know, what's your sort of being experience in the sense of within the Muslim community and the sort of fanboy approach to Jordan Peterson? Have you seen it? Have you not? Like,
I have
um,
seen it. Initially, I was attracted to some of his ideas because he claimed to be a pragmatist. but the more that I read about him, the more I heard him, I felt like he's more of a pseudo pragmatist. He just utilizes pragmatism when it's convenient for him as well, especially his reliance on Jung, which makes no sense to me because it's like Jung. Most pragmatists would roll their eyes at Jung. Like, this guy's weird. Like, it's completely useless in many respects. I like his sort of psychological approach to a degree, but I hate the fact that he reduces everything to psychology, when in fact Islam is also about spiritual, being spiritual and about transcendence, right? Whereas Jordan Peterson's more like, well, what's in your brain? What sort of chemicals do things like that.
Yeah.
What does statistics say about men and women? And it's like, it's very materialistic. It's very superficial in many respects, especially from the Islamic perspective. So when I see Muslims attracted to that, like I said, I'm seeing, again, and going back to sort of the Andrew Tate point, it's just Muslims adopting a very Western mentality, a Western approach, reaffirming that colonized mindset. I mean, why is it that they're not attaching themselves to major scholars like this? Why are we always talking about Jordan Peterson or this person or that guy or this kafir over here? It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, what about our major scholars? Like, I rarely hear about these things from these people. Like, I rarely hear about even the hardcore conservative types, in this red pill movement. Like, they rarely mention Ibn Taymiyyah or, Ibn Qayyim or just a number of other scholars I can bring up in the tradition. There's always mentioning some dude from the 21st century, some kafir guy. And don't get me wrong, some kuffar can have good points too. Non-Muslims can have good points too. I'm not saying that, but we should be utilizing their ideas as supplements, not Islamic ideas as supplements.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like
That's
we
definitely. I
are
think. Yeah.
submitting Islam to we're putting it's like we're putting Jordan Peterson up here and we're putting Islam down here. We're saying Jordan Peterson is the tafsir for our religion, when it should be our religion is the tafsir for Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. I think even when it comes to Jordan Peterson, I think like on the surface level, in the sense of personal responsibility, all that sort of stuff, is like, can't even really disagree, to be honest. Like, we want to be the best version of ourselves, yada yada. But I think the whole framework that he's operating from, it's like very selective. Even like his potentially outlook on feminism kind of fits into that kind of framework of, for example, evolution in biology. It's a holistic framework of, okay, look, the world sucks and it's savage, and we male female had in the past were I don't know, we were in the wild, and survival of the fittest, and nature, nurture, in the sense of how we formed, and we're at this kind of state now, and we're existing within a system of capitalism. And so within that system, it's like, only thing that makes sense is like, okay, just be the best version of yourself. But it's really kind of erasing the conversation about the actual structural issues. Like, he doesn't really bring that to light. And I think, like, from the Islamic perspective, like, we've always been about trying, for example, Beit al-Amal is like one example of how, I guess, the government's trying to do the best for the people, and how essentially, like, Islam is also a mix of structural versus personal responsibility. But the Jordan Peterson kind of approach is very individualistic, and the world sucks,
Yeah,
but just
he's a
be the
Western
best version.
medieval.
So it's like, it's taking out from kind of actual, like, oppression that exists. And so I think Muslims in that kind of just kind of take him on board as, okay, look, we're just gonna borrow these ideas because it sounds good. It's like, they don't realize it's a whole. We're talking about instrumentalizing knowledge. He's sort of doing that selectively to fit into his kind of uh, holistic framework, because that's how, even like when he speaks about Islam, he has to be essentially, oh, look, look at Muslim culture. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, he's trying to
Yeah.
create this kind of dichotomy of clash of civilizations to suit his own sort of kind of almost pro-capitalist sort of outlook, if anything, because he is like, he talks up, oh, look at society now, it's been, I don't know, least amount of poverty than before, just suck it up
Yeah.
and work hard. And it's kind
That's
of, yeah.
something I don't understand either about Muslims who still follow him. I mean, if you look at, his first and I don't want to make this whole conversation about Jordan Peterson, but his first interview to learn about Islam, quote unquote, was from a rabid ex-Muslim who hates Muslims in Islam.
Mm.
Like that should have already tipped you off. Not necessarily that he hates Islam, but that he has his Western mentality is very much corrupt in his understanding of things. Um, his reliance on somebody who hates Muslims and Islam as a source of information
Yeah.
is already indicative that he's not his ideas are not going to align with our faith.
Yeah. Subhanallah.
His perception of what Islam teaches about gender and things is not going to align uh, with him, and vice versa. So the fact that Muslims are like, well, he says he has good ideas, and this conforms to Islam. It's like, I don't think he thinks that. so, so what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's definitely like a good point in that sense. And it's like he'll only have Ayan Hirsi Ali or Sam Harris, the convenient people to kind of, justify his sort of views and sort of perpetuate his already preconceived ideas of what Islam is or what it should be. And that's basically what you're working with. And so it's like, how can you be like, looking up to me in that sense, right? Like, yeah, I don't even disagree. Like some kind of personal responsibility sort of takes that he has. You can't really disagree in that perspective, but the whole kind of framework outlook is problematic. So it's like that kind of obsession over him becomes like a bit, I don't know. I find it cringe sometimes, but each their own,
Well,
I
I know it
guess.
is cringe. It's okay to say it's cringe. It's fine to say it's cringe. It's fine, because the thing is, it would make sense if we didn't have such a vibrant, such a deep intellectual tradition with so many great figures. But the reality is that we have such a wealth of knowledge within our own tradition. We have such a wealth of figures within our own tradition that eclipse these people.
Yeah,
These people
I
are
agree.
morons in comparison. They're morons
Mm,
in comparison to our scholars and to our religious founders, if you want to call them that, right? To the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi
it's
wasallam,
awesome.
they are morons,
Yeah,
okay? And Muslims are just flocking to them and just ignoring what is in front and behind us. We have access to even. And I don't know if it's language boundaries or if it's just something else, but I mean, it is sad and pathetic. And yeah, you have a right to say it's cringe. You have a right to cringe at every moment. And some of these guys are gonna and women are gonna feel insulted by what we're saying. But like, I want to ask them a serious question, like, why are you not relying on our tradition?
yeah,
I mean, there are also contemporary scholars who eclipse these people, who
yeah.
eclipse them. Practitioners of tasawwuf. You want to talk about psychology? You care about psychology? So there are great masters of tasawwuf, okay, that still exist in this ummah. You should be studying at their feet. They will teach you psychology. They will teach you how to better yourself. They will teach you about your nafs, right? But no,
Exactly.
you want to listen to Jordan Peterson on YouTube.
Mm.
Seriously. Like,
And a lot
sorry,
of
I'm ranting,
the
but
it's like even like one very small text in the Islamic tradition that like Abu Zayd al-Balkhi's Sustenance of the Soul is like a beautiful text to understand anxiety, depression, and all that, sort of unpack that. And we can like you don't hear people in that kind of JP framework, or people that really like Jordan Peterson kind of look to these kind of texts, or even these figures, or even current times, like as you're like alluding to. Dr. Carey York has immense work, and she's done immense work on like Islamic psychology and kind of incorporating tasawwuf and those kind of principles and foundations. Like there's so much like work in that sense, but for some reason like we don't draw upon it. I don't know. Like I don't know if it's like a like maybe because JP is just kind of well known and people kind of gravitate towards him, they're just kind of going with the flow, or like if it's just I don't know, like groupthink. I have no idea. It becomes like a bit unfortunate. I think in that sense as well.
yeah, and like I say, it goes back to all the other issues we pointed out earlier, right? It's colonized mindset. And I think the solution right now, if anyone takes from this conversation, is that we need to realize it's a colonized mindset. We need to realize that a lot of these movements, that a lot of this sentiment, that a lot of these ideas that are coming out of the current Dawah scene online is really just a colonized sentiment, derived primarily from kufr. The grievances that you have, that these people have, may be very much legitimate, right? Oh, there's a break, the family's being broken apart, there's a rampant zina. Of course, we're all concerned about these things, right? But the method is just as important in Islam as the conclusions, as the ideas. The methods are as important as the ideas. Okay. And a lot of people seem to forget that, especially within our communities, right? The method is just as important. If you have the method wrong, then it doesn't matter what your grievances are. It doesn't matter what your conclusions are. You're not being Islamic. And sorry for this extreme example. I'd like to bring this up to make my point. Like, I'm going to say this and probably go on the watch list, right? But I agree with ISIS's grievances. I agree with Al Qaeda's grievances. I understand why the Taliban are upset. I agree that there's problems in the world that need to be resolved and Islam needs to come back. I agree with those grievances and those concerns. I do not agree with ISIS methodology. I do not agree with Al Qaeda's methodology. They're anti Islamic, killing innocent people, oppressing people. This is anti Islamic behavior. We do not suddenly go, oh, those guys have a point. you know, and then just discard their methodology. But yeah, their methods are wrong, but they have a point. It's like no Muslim says that. No sane Muslim says that. No Muslim on the manhaj says that.
So,
Okay, but when it comes to these guys, these red pillars and these other, these Akh-Right guys, it's like suddenly we throw out methods where it's like, oh well, they have a point, so it's okay that they're borrowing extensively from red pill ideas and they're even utilizing red pill terminology. You notice this too, like
yeah,
we're
like cucks,
simp
soy
and cuck.
boys.
It's like I say that too just to make fun of them. Like when I confront one of these guys, I like to call
Yeah.
them these names too and stuff, just to kind of like tease them because they hate it when those words are thrown back at their face, right? But it's like where is this in our Islamic tradition? Wallahi, recently I saw this tweet by, I think it was by Daniel actually, where somebody was complaining about oh yeah, the about empowerment of women or something, right? Oh, we need to empower women. He's like, where's that concept in the Quran? It's like, and then the first thing I was thinking about was like, where's the word simp in the Quran? Like, you it's like, but it's okay for you to use those terms.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
I don't understand why. It's like they want to appeal to tradition when it's convenient for them.
yeah. Subhanallah. Um, I wanted to maybe to wrap up. I want to ask you two quick questions, kind of a bit separate to what we're discussing. But do you have any final thoughts in regards to everything we discussed?
I didn't, to be quite frank, I thought this was just a preliminary discussion. I didn't know this was the actual discussion.
Oh,
I thought we
actually,
were just prepping for the discussion, so I was a lot more just kind of like all over the place. So hopefully you'll edit some parts out to make it more coherent. But final thoughts. My final thoughts are, wow. Okay, since we're concluding, we need to reattach ourselves to the tradition by rejecting these very Western liberal concepts and constructs. I know that's easier said than done, but I think the first realization that a lot of these young brothers and sisters even have to come to with respect to Akh-Right and the Red Pill movement is that they need to realize that they're really no different from feminists. They may have different conclusions, but they have similar methodologies. And if your method comes from kufr, it doesn't matter that you differ on the conclusionary aspects. You're still anti-Islamic. You're still not Islamic at all in your perception of things. And if you don't start from the base of Islam, you're not going to get Islam. You're not going to reach the conclusion that you're thinking you're going to reach. You're not going to get the results that you think you're going to get. I anticipate and I predict that in the next 10 years, at most, all this Akh-Right red pill stuff that's being adopted by Muslims, online especially, is going to backfire tremendously. There's going to be blowback, intellectual blowback. And I made the same prediction about the scientific miracle claims, and that came true. You have a large group of individuals apostating from Islam as a result of scientific miracle claims. You have a lot of individuals reversing their Dawah now, saying that that's no longer legitimate after they had utilized it for such a long period of time, right? And the same thing's going to happen in the next couple of years. It's going to be the same thing all over again with this Akh-Right stuff. You're going to see more feminists than you're going to see fewer. You're going to see more sisters, being driven away. You're going to see more apostasy as a result of this stuff. It's not something that I want to happen, but it's the unfortunate reality that I predict is going to occur. And then you're going to have some of these da'is who were promoting this stuff in the past are going to come out and say, "Oh, astaghfirullah, I grew up and I realized it was all wrong, and I want to make amends, and you know, and by that time it's going to be too late."
Mm.
And I'm just telling you because, again, if you're going to react to feminism by utilizing the very thing that feminism is reacting to or came into existence as a result of, you're only going to create more feminism. That's all you're going to do.
Yeah.
And you're going to create a lot of men who have a very warped perception of masculinity who are going to lose themselves even more. They're going to lose their identities even more because as you get older, and you see a lot of the youth are mostly attracted to this movement, right? As they get older, as they become husbands, fathers, as they go into their 30s and their 40s, your mentality is going to change. How old are you, by the way? I forgot.
I'm 24.
24. Okay. I'm not trying to be condescending, but when I want to say, or, pretentious to you, but, you're 24 years old. When you hit 30, brother, in 6 years, I promise you're going to have a different mentality about yourself and about the world. Okay. That's what happened to me. It's what happened to a lot of brothers. And I'm pretty sure that when I hit 40, I'm going to be thinking differently as well. But a lot of things change as a man. We take a lot longer to mature than women do, mentally speaking, right?
Yeah.
And as you get older as a male, your mind slows down a bit. You start to see things a little bit more holistically. You start to be more considerate. You're right. Your anger, if you're growing up, that is, there's some people who don't mature, I know. But as you get older, you get less angry. You don't have time to be angry. You have to be considerate. And if you're a father, your mentality changes completely as well there, especially if you have a daughter. Like a lot of these kids, I'm going to call them kids, who are attracted to this Akh-Right stuff, what's going to happen when they have daughters?
Yeah.
I bet you all of this stuff that they're preaching about online is going to go away like that.
Yeah, subhanAllah.
Because the moment they see their little girl, they're not going to want that for their daughter.
Yeah, subhanAllah. No, that was really, really well spoken and really and really good insights in that regard. Through age and through maturity, things and outlook of how you view the world and even yourself, will change in that regard and something to be cognizant of as well. I wanted to sort of ask you as well because I know that because the last time we interviewed you, you're like within the sort of Dawah sphere and all that, but now you've sort of stepped away from that. I want to ask you like what's sort of the reason as to why you sort of took a step back when it comes to polemics and Dawah stuff that you used to do in the past. You used to like heavily be sort of debating ex-Muslims and all that, and I noticed you don't do it as much now. I don't think you do it at all anymore. You sort of
not really
took a step back. Yeah, can I just get your sort of perspectives as to why that sort of happened and
there's actually
sort of transition for you?
A number of reasons that eventually kind of all collided into general apathy towards Dawah, the Dawah scene. At first, it was the realization that at first I would say that the reason was ego, the realization that there was a lack of appreciation for the work that we do. But then when I realized that it was about ego, I continued, but I still had this sort of sentiment in my heart there was a problem. And when I realized it was about ego, then I started looking at others in the same way. Maybe there's ego elsewhere. Maybe other people have similar problems. So I started seeing, I know it sounds very strange and vague, but allow me to explain myself. I started to see that there were flaws because when I saw flaws in myself, When you reflect upon your own condition, you start to see the world, right? That's what the Quran says, is that you see signs within yourself, right? And so the moment that you see the signs within yourself, that's projected onto the rest of reality. That sounds very deep, but it actually true when you think about it and you experience it. So I started to see that there were other flaws within the Dawah movement itself, because when I saw flaws within myself, I started seeing it within others. And I wanted to rectify these issues, but I couldn't really figure out what the whole issue was. Then I started seeing, I guess you could say, the not just the Akh-Right, but sort of these attacks on scholars, constant attacks on scholars. And it wasn't criticism. It wasn't criticism. It was literally slander and libel. Just picking things out of context, just going after people. And then I knew that was the manifestation of the ego that I was trying to defeat within my own self. And when I saw how the Dawah scene was going, just the route it was going, the first thing I tried to do was I tried to correct it, course correction, because I had sort of I had provided the soil for that in the early stages of my Dawah career as well, this refutation culture. But I couldn't. The majority were siding with a lot of these figures, these anti-scholarly, anti-traditional figures. And then, as more time went on and less ego was involved, and I didn't care as much, I started to have more apathy for the movement itself. I started just not caring, to be frank with you. And the moment that I started not caring, I started realizing that I can't give my all to something that I don't care about.
Yeah.
In the same way. Now, I want to be clear that it's not that I don't care about Muslims and I don't care about spreading the truth. I do. I don't care about this scene. I don't care about the online Dawah scene. I think it's been completely corrupted and destroyed from within. I think there's a cancer within the movement right now that needs to be resolved. But I no longer have the motivation to do so. I'm tired, to be frank. I'm
Yeah.
tired. I want to focus on my family now. I want to focus on bettering myself. And inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits and believe and wants to utilize me as a tool to eventually come back or to fix it, then I will do so. But in the meantime, my heart is not in that place. And as a result, because I want to be sincere and I don't want to lie to people and I don't want to put on a face, I have to step
Yeah.
away. So that's what I'm doing. Um, that
Yeah.
sounds really depressing, right? So,
Sounds like the sad movies, but the sort of at the end of it though, like it's not like a bad ending because it's like the main character, sort of came to this a higher, realization or understanding. So it's not all doom and gloom in that
I
sense
want
as
to
well.
feel that way while trying to remove ego from it. I want to believe that I've transcended, that I've sort of moved beyond, that I'm more concerned about more important things, which I think I am. I do believe that I am, because now I'm focusing on the real world. Like I have several events scheduled, Dawa events scheduled in the real world. I'm not telling people, explicitly. I'm not advertising it that much, like that I'm going to be participating in, and I feel it's more valuable. But in terms of the online scene, I find it to be completely useless now, and just more corrupting for the soul than it is a benefit for the ummah. And and I don't know how it's going to resolve itself. I don't know how it's going to fix itself. I don't know if I'm ever going to enter the scene again, but at this point in time, I feel a higher calling. At least that's, like I said, I want to believe that. And I just have complete apathy. So, but if you want a more positive note to that apathy, I'm a lot happier
Alhamdulillah,
than I was
yeah.
before. I'm very happy not having to deal with this stuff anymore. I'm very happy just spending time on myself and my family. And I'm very happy just knowing that I'm no longer part of such a toxic culture, because that's what it is. I'm sorry, Frank, for a lot of people out there, but the Dawa scene right now online is extremely toxic. It's not Islamic at all. It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really toxic and um yeah, I can't begin to describe like I don't know, it's just that certain culture that exists and permeates that it's really sickening at times. It's very I don't know, I can't it's hard to describe in words sometimes. It's, it's a really weird and strange culture that's sort of, existing within. And I think it's very, I don't know, it doesn't, it's not, I also feel that there's a sort of sometimes like almost DH approach of looking at, views of women. I feel it permeate a lot of that kind of misogyny as well within that sort of, I don't know, that sort of Dawah culture as well. So it kind of like, I don't know, that it just adds to that culture at times. And
Well,
I don't know,
it
it's
is
just
it
sort of
is
I
the culture.
personally experienced.
I
Yeah.
mean, and we keep naming him, and we have to be frank though. He's one of the forerunners. He's one of the individuals who is, you know, keeping this cancer alive, and the one who's even started in many respects. And he's the central figure, as far as I'm concerned, surrounding um, the lack of adab within the online ummah social sphere. And to clarify what I mean by adab, because people have this very superficial concept of adab. It's not etiquette necessarily. It's not just how you speak and what you say. It's also about how you treat things, in terms of justice, in terms of being just, in terms of being balanced. When you lack adab, that's not merely that you lack etiquette, you lack akhlaq. You also lack a proper perspective. You lack wasatiyah. You lack true understanding, right? And that's a huge problem. Um, and when you lack adab, the reality is you can't preach about the religion. You can't teach the religion. You
Yeah.
can't manifest the religion in your own behaviors and actions. You can't. You just can't. So your followers will inevitably lead anti-Islamic lifestyles, not simply non-Islamic, anti-Islamic.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, look, the biggest evidence of that is that when you see lay people attacking scholars and students of knowledge left and right, know that they're corrupt.
Exactly. Yeah.
There should never be an open season on scholars and students of knowledge. And when there is, there's deviance hiding behind the
So
corner.
yeah.
So
So yeah, it's lots to unpack in that kind of that sort of toxic culture that does exist within a segment of our community. But I know I've kept you for a while,
it's
so
okay.
I'll probably wrap it up here. But Jazakallah khair for coming on Boys in Cave. It was a really we touched on really interesting and very fruitful discussion points, and I think inshallah the listeners sort of benefit from it. And thank you for giving your time and having this kind of discussion with us as well.
Thank you for having me and listening to me rant again. So, jazakallah khair.
Welcome.
Inshallah, I pray that you will always be well, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to facilitate you in your goals, and this podcast as well. And I pray
I
that
mean,
inshallah things will become better in the future.
I
So
mean, yeah, and even for yourself, may Allah make, I know you have like a newborn, so mashallah, it's a lot of responsibility there, and in that sense, even in your own projects as well that you're sort of currently doing as well, may Allah bless you in all your sort of, aspirations and ambitions, and also your family
jazakallah
life
khair.
as well. So for
Thank
our
you so much.
listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to email us at infoboysinthecave.com. You can follow us on Facebook, and we're on Instagram and Twitter as well. Inshallah, follow us there. And make sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, as that greatly helps us. And we also have a Patreon page that you can support us on. And if you donate to the $5 tire, you can jump on our WhatsApp chat, exclusive WhatsApp chat, where we have even Asadullah Ali on that chat as well. You can probably talk to him there. So you can hop on patreon.com/boys in the cave. So from our special guests, Asadullah Ali and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.